There is a name that can get a stranger to buy you a drink in a Highland pub. Say, McDonald, or Campbell, or Bruce, and for a moment you are not just a tourist. You are, supposedly, a bloodline. For generations, that has been the promise whispered through clan societies, tartan shops, and family reunions on both sides of the Atlantic. Your surname is your ancestry. Carry the name McGregor, and somewhere behind you stands an unbroken chain of McGregors, stretching back into the mist of the Highlands. Carry the name Bruce, and perhaps, just perhaps, the blood of a king runs quietly through you. It is one of the most persistent ancestry myths in the English-speaking world, and it survived largely untested for centuries, until genetics did something clan tradition never allowed. To check what researchers found when they actually compared the Y chromosomes of men sharing these famous clan surnames did not simply confirm the old story. It split it in two. Some names held together exactly as legend promised. Others revealed something almost nobody expected, a history of clanship that had far less to do with blood than anyone had been told. This is the story of 13 surnames tied to Scotland's most famous clans, and what happened when the genome was finally allowed to testify. To understand why this mattered, you have to understand what a Scottish clan actually was. Clans were not simply extended families. They were political and territorial confederations built around a chief, bound by loyalty, land, and mutual protection. The word itself, clan, is Gaelic for children, and for centuries, that word was taken almost literally. Clan tradition held that everyone bearing the chief's name descended, in some fashion, from a shared founding ancestor. Somerled for the MacDonalds, Gregor for the McGregors, the Bruce line for the family that once wore Scotland's crown. This belief was reinforced for generations by clan genealogies, tartans, and origin legends passed down almost like scripture. It felt reasonable. Surnames were inherited from fathers. Fathers passed down Y chromosomes. If the name held, the blood should hold with it. But long before DNA testing existed, a few uncomfortable details sat quietly inside Highland history, mostly ignored. Historians of the clan system had long known that surnames in the Highlands did not always spread through birth. They spread through allegiance. Tenants living on a chief's land often adopted his surname as a mark of loyalty and protection, whether or not a single drop of his blood ran through their veins. Defeated rivals sometimes took the name of the clan that conquered them, simply to survive. Orphans, adopted children, and unrelated followers were absorbed into a clan and given its name as a matter of belonging, not biology. In other words, the clan was, in part, a political membership. And political membership does not require ancestry. It only requires loyalty. That was the first crack. And it sat there for centuries, mostly as a historical footnote, until genetics arrived with a very specific question. If you gathered 100 men named MacDonald from across Scotland today, would their Y chromosomes actually look like they came from one man? Y chromosome DNA is uniquely suited to test exactly this kind of claim. Passed almost unchanged from father to son across generations, it acts like a surname's biological shadow. If a name has truly moved down one bloodline for 800 years, the men carrying it today should share a recognizable, traceable genetic signature. If the name spread through adoption, tenancy, and political allegiance instead, that signature should be far more scattered. Researchers studying Highland Scottish populations, including a well-known genetic genealogy study published in the early 2000s, set out to test this directly using Y chromosome markers collected from men bearing surnames linked to Clan Donald and its related branches, MacDonald, MacDougall, McAllister, and others tracing descent from the 12th century warlord Somerled. If you find it fascinating that a single medieval leader's biology could still be detectable in a modern surname, this is exactly the kind of story worth subscribing for, because almost every old bloodline claim in human history hides a test like this one, waiting to be run. What they found did not simply confirm the legend. It complicated it in a very specific direction. Among men bearing Clan Donald surnames, researchers identified a distinctive Y chromosome signature appearing at a strikingly high frequency, far higher than would be expected by chance in the general Scottish population. The distribution of this signature matched almost exactly what you would expect if a single, unusually reproductively successful man, living around the time attributed to Somerled, had fathered a disproportionate share of descendants who carried his name forward for generations. This was not proof beyond the researchers were careful, as they should be, to describe it as consistent with, not definitive confirmation of, direct descent from Somerled himself. But the statistical signal was real, and it was the first time a specific medieval Scottish figure's genetic footprint had been detected, at scale, inside a modern surname. For Clan Donald, then, myth and biology lined up more closely than almost anyone expected. But that was only one clan. And what happened when researchers turned to other famous clan names told an entirely different story. Studies and independent genetic genealogy testing on men bearing other well-known clan surnames, including Campbell, MacGregor, Fraser, and Stewart, did not reveal anything close to a single dominant paternal lineage. Instead, they found something far messy: multiple, often unrelated Y chromosome lineages, sometimes a dozen or more distinct paternal lines, all carrying the exact same surname. That was not a contradiction. It was a signal. It meant that for many of Scotland's most storied clan names, the surname had never described one bloodline at all. It described a coalition, a shared name draped over dozens of separate paternal lines, tenants, allies, absorbed rivals, and adopted followers, all standing under one banner for reasons of land, protection, and politics rather than shared descent. The story did not collapse. It widened. At this point, 3 explanations sat side by side, and none of them could be dismissed. The first, some clans, like Clan Donald, genuinely did concentrate around a single powerful founding lineage whose reproductive success left a detectable genetic mark, later reinforced by the clan's dominance and prestige, which encouraged others to claim the connection. The second, many clans functioned primarily as political and territorial alliances, where surname adoption by unrelated families was common enough that, within a few generations, the clan contained far more genetic diversity than its founding legend implied. The third, and perhaps most important, both things happened simultaneously across Scottish history, at different times, in different regions, under different chiefs, meaning there is no single answer to, does my clan surname reveal my true bloodline? The honest answer depends entirely on which clan, which century, and which branch of the name you are asking about. The landmark shift in this entire field came when genetic genealogy moved beyond isolated surname studies and began comparing broader Y chromosome and autosomal data across the whole of Scotland, Ireland, and the wider British Isles. These larger datasets revealed that Highland Scottish ancestry itself is a layered composite: Pictish populations who were present before recorded history, Gaelic-speaking settlers arriving from Ireland in the early medieval period, Norse settlers and raiders who intermarried extensively along the western coasts and islands during the Viking Age, and later Anglo-Norman families who arrived after the 12th century and were absorbed into Highland society, sometimes founding clans of their own. This is where the twist fully reveals itself. Not every clan turned out to be a bloodline, but every Highlander, regardless of surname, turned out to carry an ancestry far more mixed and far older than any single clan legend allowed. The genome was not simply testing whether MacDonald descended from Somerled. It was quietly revealing that Scottish ancestry itself was never one story. It was Pictish memory, Gaelic settlement, Norse contact, and Norman arrival, folded together over more than 1,000 years, long before any tartan was ever woven or any clan crest ever carved. The surname was never the whole inheritance. It was, at most, a flag planted on top of it. Picture the west coast of the Highlands as it actually was in the centuries this story covers: sea locks cutting deep into black rock, longships riding the tide beside Gaelic fishing boats, island communities where Norse and Gaelic families intermarried for generations until neither language nor bloodline stood entirely apart. Further inland, glens where cattle were the true currency of loyalty, where a chief's protection was worth more than a stranger's blood, and where taking his name was simply the price of belonging to a world too dangerous to survive alone. This was not a landscape built for purity. It was built for alliance, for survival, for people binding themselves to each other however they could. That is the real ancestor of the modern clan surname, not one man's blood in most cases, but an entire landscape's need to belong to something larger than any single family. None of this makes the clan names less meaningful. If anything, it makes them more human. A surname that survived 1,000 years of war, migration, famine, and empire did so not because it obeyed a rule of pure biology, but because it did something biology alone cannot do. It held people together on purpose, across bloodlines, across centuries, through nothing more than a shared decision to belong to the same story. Somewhere in that decision is a truth larger than any single clan. Identity was never only inherited. It was also chosen, defended, and passed down by people who were not always blood relatives, but who made themselves family anyway. The DNA did not destroy the legend of the clans. It did something more interesting. It showed which parts of the legend were biology, which parts were politics, and which parts were simply the oldest and most human thing people have ever done, deciding, generation after generation, who belongs to us. If you want more stories where an old family legend meets the evidence and comes out changed rather than broken, let me know in the comments which surname or clan I should look into next. Because in the end, the map every family carries in its name is almost never as simple or as small as the story first suggests. And what the genome remembers is very often larger, older, and far more human than the myth it was asked to prove.